One of the things that keeps coming to mind as I'm speaking to you all is the immense value of just hearing the conversation about the struggles of other painters. And I'm talking about actually people who've been up a road that you've never been on yet. You didn't, so I'm not talking. But although it actually, it's one of those things. There's always this conversation about the cafes in Paris, where Degas would actually be sitting and conversing with Gérôme. I mean, of all people, right? And Manet, and the list goes on and on and on. Conversations, highly recommended, by the way, featured somewhat in the book by Rothenstein, the two-volume book called Men and Memories. Really, really interesting stuff. But those conversations are valuable because of artists are talking to each other and they're talking about each other, which some people think is somehow a bad thing, but how can it be a bad thing, right? Even, even when you're talking about another painter, you're talking about, I mean, I don't think many of us could care at all, really, about attacking a painter or being upset with a painter, or, it's way more about ideas and about methods and things like that and about best ways, right? So the road I've been on, has got certain kinds of value. If you're even slightly on the same road, which you want to figure out, by the way, is this your road? Or is it a different one that you're really on? Because you don't want to hang around a guy when you look at his work. It isn't the kind of stuff that you're even interested in doing. Why would you listen to that guy? Although it is interesting that Degas says you can learn something from anybody, and that actually is a very valuable idea. But I often think of it, though, in terms of the idea of having been high up as the guides have been on the top of the Himalayas, and you're just sitting there as you're trucking your way up there, and you're seeing people coming down, and you want to know where they've been or what they've seen, and whether you could actually survive in such thin air, or what is the nature of that whole trip, And it doesn't mean that you even have to think of them as being that high. They just have to have been someplace you haven't been. So I do like this question, though, because it really, there are key features to the way the Boston School painting is laid in. And so I thank you, Richard. Here's his question. I find getting things related to each other in the setup, and now he's referring back to that start when we did in '87 and then followed up with, I think it was last week. I find getting things related to each other in the setup, that is, sitting right in front of you, less of a challenge than getting the whole of the setup well placed within the frame, which is not in the visual field. So I'm not sure what he means. He means the frame isn't sitting there in the visual field. I assume that's what you mean, Richard, that because the frame isn't there framing it for you, you can't just paint around, you can't just easily see where everything lands. And he says even using a viewfinder. So the viewfinder is that frame, and we do use that. Obviously we do. If we're going to paint directly from life and not have to do preliminary studies of all kinds, thumbnails, and then frame them up and all that stuff, figure all that stuff, we have to, in painting from life. And of course the guy, Degas' great enemy, the en plein air painter, has really got that problem, right? If he actually means to paint what he sees and not just make stuff up. Which I think most of us do. I'm not much, actually. I have to admit that I enjoy painting outdoors, but I'm not that guy. And yet, the process is exactly the same wherever you're painting, whatever you're doing. You have to do the same exact thing. So let me just walk you through it. I'm going to show you just a few slides, as we often are doing lately, and I think you'll get onto this fairly easily. So, what are the elements of getting this thing located in the page? Richard is saying he finds, I think what you're saying, Richard, is that you find it easier to get this right to this, say to that, or the stuff we were talking about in that lay-in that Lynn did. So you're able to get the parts of a piece of the picture right, but the hard part is getting it situated in the frame overall, right? So I think that's what you're saying. And if that's what you're saying, there's not a whole lot more to it. Let me just explain all there is to the thinking. When you first look out there and you're looking through your viewfinder, you've got to consider one thing. First of all, right? How big is this mass you're calling your center of interest? How big and where is it located in relation to the frame? That's huge, right? Now, this guy seems to have come to the conclusion that her forehead was going to go right down the middle, right? And that mostly this whole thing was going to be just off center to the left, maybe a little bit, you'd say, of being right on center, right? And I'm talking about, so it's the location of this. Now, how big is this whole mass in the frame? That's a feeling you get beforehand. You just sit there and look at it and you say, Yeah. I can see how big that should be, and you take a note of that in your mind as you're looking through your viewfinder. The next thing you got to do, and I'm summing it all up in one image. I'll go through it again with three other ones, okay? But in this image here, we have the need, actually, this very simple one. Besides having it already fixed in your mind about where that's going to go both left and right, up and down, and how big it's going to be, okay? We call that scale. How big it's going to be within the frame is scale, right? That's the scale of that. That's the word we use for it. So you're going to see, though, that the most important thing is actually to know exactly where the exits are, right? This is called an exit. And so this is like something like a third. It's a little less than a third, right, where that exits. So you put that right around that third area. Well, these exits are just as important. So this is more like a quarter. It's a little bigger than a quarter. Maybe it's, yeah, just a little bit bigger than a quarter. So if I use that and say, so somewhere up here is half, then where is that? You can feel those things. You can set those things. If you're looking through a viewfinder, now, what's happening is you don't get so excited when you're looking through a viewfinder. You got to stay calm, right? And just consider these things. Take notes. Take mental notes. And I want to know, so I want to know the exit here if I possibly can, and over here. Now, if there's one down here, I want to know it, but there doesn't appear to be one down here. So we're going to be relying on this one to do most of the work, and the fact that this thing here is nearly centered, just off left a little bit. So that's rather useful. Maybe even some part of it, say part of the eye, might be flat on center, right on the center. And you'd say that. Or some part of this might even be, some aspect of her, maybe that part of her leg right there, you notice. So you'll notice some things that are useful, and that's really the key to this, right? And I'm saying things that are useful that have to do with the frame itself, right? So how big it is in the frame, where it is left, where it is, how it's elevated. Gamble used to, by the way, talk about the elevator effect. When you're framing this stuff, do it aesthetically. So when you look out there and you're trying to get a sense of the grandness of the world, and this person isn't filling, she isn't filling the top of it, you have a reason to do it the way you're doing it. You get her down just where you like her, so it also talks about that space the way you want it to. Anyway, but the elevation, he talked about the elevator effect, and that's when you have the characters too low in relation to the frame, and it looks like the elevator's going up and you're losing your clients. And the same old thing, left and right. That's the left and right thing is about equilibrium. You're always looking through your viewfinder to see if that total pile of stuff there, if you had a line right down your viewfinder, you'd say, is the left in equilibrium with the right? It's a simple process. Do it. Try it. Play around. So we have that. We have the size of this thing, that whole thing. I went through it twice. Then we have to learn these locations and get them, just be calm and say them to yourself. Put words out. Say, this is a third, that one's such and such. So the hard part is that you really don't have a frame out there. So you have to quickly resort to the rectangle that is your canvas. And so whenever you're picturing a quarter or a third, you're picturing it there on the canvas because the canvas is now the frame, right? The very shape of the canvas is actually the frame. So you actually know this goes at a third within the frame, right? And this lands at a whatever in relation to a quarter of the frame, and so on. All right. And so the same thing with anything. Halves are, Gam used to say halves aren't that impressive. You get halves. Sometimes halves are useful, sometimes they're not. But certain things in this picture, he seems to be having stuff that lands around half. And both the stuff this way here, like the front of her face, seems to be there. And this stuff here on her neck seems to be rather in that position of being, but it's something where you can say we can do that. But it's far more important to have your memory going on the feeling of the whole, how the major masses feel in the whole. All right. And then you got to get right on it, right? So you got to put enough of these players out there, like this and this, enough of these markers so that you begin to see how it's going to sit in the whole, right? And you got to get this to this. You certainly have impressionists. You go ahead and get the blues out here. You get some of the darks. You spot these colors around, and then you bring them together just to form that. And I'm going to show you that more easily in the next slide. All right. So I'm doing it all here. Let's do it in the next slide so you can have some more fun. So this is an interior by Tarbell. That first one was a decamp, by the way, just so you know. I'm sure you did know. I shouldn't be, though, should I? But you can see how he's been impressive. He's very precise about these exits, right? Exactly the same mindset. He's very, very precise about the exits. What's harder to see is how precise he is about this, right? Now, this is classically what we call the center of interest, or if you look at this whole thing, right, this is the area of dominating interest and the placement of that. And then again, the scale of this whole mass here sort of begins somewhere here and ends somewhere there. So, in that larger sense is how does that feel in the whole? That's the scale thing again. how far she is left and right. So this is like in the golden mean right here, right? So that's an easy thing to remember. And but the rest of the stuff isn't very important, except that as you go along, when you may look for something like this and say, that reads well. That wouldn't be bad to have that in the right location. This thing with a little bend in it, and get the angle right between there, and get the actual proportions right. This looks like this proportion here is like the inverse of what this is doing. Like this goes this to this, or this part here, I should really say. And this seems to be the short side is over here, the long side's over here as proportions go, if you follow what I'm saying. Now, even when things are vague up there, there's a certain, in terms of the exiting, there's a certain location that you want them in. Now, you're just looking, as I said, through the viewfinder, so you don't need to know every little thing here. If you blur your eyes a ton, this whole area is just a big wash, right? The whole thing is a big white wash. So all that matters is this, and then you'll have that, right? And that's all you really need. You should be able to get your location. And by the way, some of these other things that relate to that, like this is very near the edge. Now, you try to avoid having things that are important near the edge, but sometimes the thing near the edge is useful. When you're doing the size of this thing to the hole, yes, it makes sense to notice that this thing here is, say, half the distance or double the distance of this piece right here. Those kinds of things are important to notice as you're looking. But again, you've got to calm yourself down. Don't get too excited. That's one of those things I used to find historically difficult. I'd be out there and it's just like, I can't remember this. There's too many things. Well, you can if you just pause there and say, oh yeah, that in relation to that. Yeah. I want this to be such and such a big, and this thing here is going to be double or half the size of this thing. And, there's little things like that may be of use. Now, I also have noticed that with the exits, there's another thing that's placement is, if you see this height here, this height is really a function of this length. And that really is rather significant. So when you're first making a top and bottom, this will be your player. Be very good about getting this height to feel right to this length. That's one of the hardest part. I don't know why that's so difficult for people, as it were, to see boxes. But this height here to this length, right? These are a big deal. This is a box. This one here is double the height for that length of this one up here, right? And that's, again, it's the height, this thickness is a function of a given. The given is that width. All right, now I hope I don't run out of time here. I might, because I went too long on the last one. Let's go on to the next one. Now, this is outdoors. Now, the other one was too, that you went by to camp, but this is another tarbell. This is a more difficult one because this stuff is so irregular. Look at all this crazy stuff. How do you even know where to begin? Well, the most easy given one is this. Again, like the magic, this is like the magic rectangle, the magic division, we call that the golden mean. The feeling of where this lands in relation to this. You see he's doing it again, very much like in the last one. I don't think he's operating from that specifically. And yet, here he does it again, right here. This one has that. So this is a little smaller to this than that one was. But it still has that feeling. Now, you can begin to see why the articulation of this is so important, though. It has to be very precise because it's one of the locators. In space, it's one of the locators. This is one of the locators. This is being done with a number of things. So the exit over here will be a factor in that. There's not much over here. So you'll be relying on parts of this line or pieces of this and parts of that and pieces of this, parts of that, as you make this, as you begin to process this location. That's one of the most important locations on here. But then this one, left and right speaking, this is probably the key one. And then how far she is from the edge again, and the same thing like this one over here would be one of those places where you say how far from the edge, left and right. And you can see that these two aren't very dissimilar, right? These 2 points. And they're not going to be a problem by being similar because there's too many other ones that are doing too many other things. So that's the way you're going to play with it outdoors. You may observe through your viewfinder that there's not a light exit here, that the nearest thing to a light exit, or the actual light exit, there is one over here. There is a light exit. Now this is a dark area, so the lights make the exit. Unlike that previous one. Oops, did I go too fast or what? Can I? I'm not very efficient at this. See, this is a light picture, so these darks make the exits here, in this upper area here. The dark makes the exit. This is light down here. The dark is the marker. The marker is going to be in a light picture. It's going to be the dark. And so this area up here is dark. But you'll notice that. You may find that something about this is right exactly half, and that might be useful. This leg is close to half, or maybe between these two we're getting, maybe this one's more like it. Half, just meaning this way. Don't think you have to get this perfect this way unless you're using it for this. But that mark can be made, a light effect can be made there, a spot can be set there. All right. So I'm saying the same things over and over. Don't you follow it? Now, this is one of my own interiors, and I can just tell you what I did exactly in this one. The biggest deal with me was to locate this, right? And so I was sitting there looking at this whole thing. And I said, that's my big event. And actually, I really like where it locates here. And again, I'm saying this edge here is rather just by coincidence. As I looked through this and liked what I saw, I didn't base it on the golden mean, but the golden mean or something that proportion that feels, it's one of those things. I couldn't care less about the math of the golden mean, but I do care about that spot. I call it the sweet spot or something like that. And you'll find that locator is a very useful one frequently, right? So that was the bottom of this, was that way. But then it became a question of, so how big is it? Where does this whole thing land? Because it's a big like blob. Where does it land in relation to the top and bottom? And where does it land in relation to left and right? So this is a big reader here, and then just washes away into all this sort of stuff. But then I'm obviously back, just like Tarbell, into exits. Now that's a kind of a cool exit. That's a nice one to have really soon. This is a good one on the right side. Obviously, there's something here, but not that much of a good one because it's off on some funny angle. Although I think this picture is cropped. Actually, I probably would have used that line right there to describe this proportion, and it looks like something very like a third, right? If I'm using that as the third marker. And then, obviously, all these other exits, but this stuff over here, here's one here. You make up your mind about one, or two, but where it goes out of the picture, probably the location of this I may have found even more important. It's not important by strength visually, but it is actually in a very good spot that's important. It's an important location. But I'm just saying I'm looking through a viewfinder and I'm locating, this is the main thing is where exactly do I want that located? And it would be actually rather smack in the middle of this picture, nearly, just slightly left as a total match if you go from this light effect to that. But the fact is, this light goes all the way up into here, right? So I'm looking at how this thing does that and how it feels in this big thing. So get your head around that. And then, as I said before, so that's got a location. It's got a scale, any mass that you make in a picture has got a certain scale to the whole. This one is not as easy to see as as in some of the previous ones, like the size of the two women together. So, I don't know. I think that's probably as much as I can tell you, but you have to take your sweet time and make sure you get these, Get whatever exits you think are useful. But you don't want to pick a lot of them. You want just a handful that you can actually remember. So let me just leave it at that for now. You can see this would have been a pretty important locator. But, if you're going out of the picture toward the top, I remember just saying, I'm going to clip off just the tips of this chandelabra, but this is going to be well into the picture here. Those are kinds of pieces of information that are huge. This one here, hitting right on the edge, I technically don't recall that it actually does that, but it might. I certainly didn't meaningfully put it right on the edge. I would typically, the rule of thumb is to go all the way out the picture. Or to be inside a little bit. But in any case, that's a very good exit. It's a very good marker from the proportions this way for locating. But so there's the end of this chair you can use. Just say that little bit of that chair is going to show up in the picture, or this little bit of whatever that is just going to show up in the picture. Just like I said about these, and those will help you get the frame started. But yeah, but it takes those several components: the spot of the location of the major event, the center of interest, and the scale of it to the whole, and then those exits. Those are the keys. So good luck with that, Richard. Let me know if I've answered enough of the questions. And I'll stop right now before it gets ridiculously long, that it always does. Okay. All right, take care. Don't forget to share, comment, and all the rest, folks, if you would. And I really do appreciate some of the numbers. I'm clearly on the track of what you're really looking for, which is practical information. I was very, very surprised at how little anybody wanted to hear about Caravaggio or Rembrandt, but you guys put the questions out there, so I just did the talking. I don't feel like I'm the guy that even wants to be talking about that. I'm really a craftsman who wants to talk about the craft, so I really do appreciate these questions that you're bringing too. So I'm glad you do. All right, I better stop, but I'll just show you just for 2 seconds. This is a study for a landscape I did, but it's in the same exact category. Where you have this idea of exactly what's the key thing that you're going to locate. Is it going to be that? There's an exit here, there's the little bit of this over here. Those are the kinds of things that are going to give you you might even use, a certain point on a hillside somewhere, or the dip here might be very key to this. And the mass of that will be very important. How big is that area going to be when you look at the frame? But So yeah, much of the same. I'm saying too much now. All right, take care. Talk to you next time. All right.